This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, Algeria and the United Kingdom have reiterated their commitment to reach a lasting, fair and mutually acceptable solution based on the UN settlement providing for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. African trade unionists at the 12th Congress of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity have expressed their solidarity with the Palestinian people being subjected to barbaric aggression by the Israeli army. And as the Israeli army continued to extend its operations in the Gaza Strip, the World Health Organization (WHO) has declared Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital a death zone and says it's considering evacuating the last patients. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The President of the Constitutional Court, Omar Belhaj, has received here in Algiers the first President of the Tunisian Administrative Court, Abdesalam Mehdi Grissia, now on an official visit of 3 days to Algeria. The two men examined bilateral relations and ways of strengthening them, notably the field of constitutional justice. As you follow to know top stories, Algeria and the United Kingdom have reiterated their commitment to reach a lasting, fair and mutually acceptable solution based on a UN settlement providing for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. In a joint communique issued at the end of the second round of the two countries' strategic dialogue, during the session, the two sides reiterated their commitment towards a UN settlement allowing the fulfillment of the Sahrawi people's rights in conformity with the UN Charter's principles. In this connection, they reiterated their full support to the efforts made by the UN Secretary-General's personnel representative Staffan de Mistura, as well as by the UN mission to Western Sahara. It is worth recalling that the Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf has had constructive talks with the British State Minister in charge of the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia, Lord Tariq Ahmed of Wimbledon, devoted to regional issues of common concern. Now, the Minister of Labour, Employment and Social Security, Faisal bin Taleb, has highlighted Algeria's efforts to promote trade union freedoms, improve workers' conditions, and prevent collective disputes in the workplace. Presiding over the opening of the 12th Congress of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity held at the International Conference Center, Abdellatif Rahal, here in Algiers, the minister said that Algeria was undergoing continuous social and economic reform, with the 2020 Constitution, which enshrines greater individual and collective rights and freedoms, including the free exercise of trade union rights. To this end, the minister evoked the implementation of numerous revisions to national legislations on the promotion of trade union freedom, the protection of trade union delegates and workers' conditions, the improvement of industrial relations, and the prevention of collective conflicts at work. Participants at the 12th Congress called for a new strategy to promote the African trade union movement and keep pace with technological advances in the labour market. In this connection, Francis Atwoli, president of the organization, pointed out that the technological advances in the labour market require the development of a new strategy for the promotion of the African trade union movement with a view to reinforcing the gains made by workers and protect their rights while ensuring a favourable working climate. Meanwhile, African trade unionists at the 12th Congress of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity have expressed their solidarity with the Palestinian people being subjected to barbaric aggressions by the Israeli army. The details with Mariam Barshi.
The participants called on the international community to intervene immediately to put an end to this violence and to deliver emergency humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. At the opening session of the Congress, the participants have anonymously expressed their support for the Palestinian people who are suffering genocide and crimes against humanity. For his part, the president of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity, Francis Atwoli, has expressed his solidarity with the Palestinian people who are being subjected to genocide by the apartheid Israel, describing this genocide as crimes against humanity. He called on the international community to intervene immediately to impose as a ceasefire and allow humanitarian aid to reach the Gaza Strip, which is facing a dramatic humanitarian situation. The Secretary General of the General Union of Palestine Workers, Abdelkader Abdullah, said the following.
We call on all free men of the world to work for an immediate end to the brutal genocide committed by the Zionist occupiers against the defenseless Palestinians and the Gaza Strip, to open corridors for the delivery of humanitarian aid.
The Secretary General of the General Union of Palestine Workers, Abdelkader Abdullah, also called for the lifting of the Israeli blockade imposed on the Gaza Strip.
As the Israeli army continued to extend its operations in the Gaza Strip, the World Health Organization, WHO, has declared Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital a death zone and says it's considering evacuating the last patients. Mariam Barshi again.
WHO indicated that one of the organization's team and other UN experts had managed to enter the hospital, where it said the situation was desperate on account of a lack of water, food, power, medicine and medical equipment. It affirmed that 2,500 displaced who had sought refuge in the hospital had been ordered by the Israeli army to evacuate together with a certain number of patients and of the medical personnel. WHO said it was preparing with its partners evacuation plans for the remaining patients, personnel and their families to other hospitals of Gaza. In this respect, the director of Gaza's hospitals affirmed that the preparations were underway for their evacuations towards Egypt via Rafah terminal. This came as the Israeli army continued to extend its operations in new districts of the Gaza Strip, notably the areas of Jabalia and Zaytun in the northern part of the Palestinian enclave. Palestinian sources affirmed that the Israeli strikes on the UN-run refuge camp of Jabalia killed scores of people. According to the UN, over two-thirds of 2.4 million inhabitants have been displaced by the war in Gaza.
Jordan's King Abdullah II said today the international community should push for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to stop the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe caused by Israel's ugly war against civilians. In remarks made during a meeting with the European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen, the monarch said the international community should force Israel to comply with international law to protect civilians and ensure Israel heeds calls to allow uninterrupted flow of aid into the enclave. The Jordanian monarch said Israel's continuation of its hideous war on Gaza and its illegal violations in the West Bank and Jerusalem will lead to an explosion in the situation in the entire region. He reiterated the need to work seriously towards a political horizon for the Palestinian issue to achieve a just and comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. The President of the European Commission affirmed her rejection of any attempts to displace the Palestinian people and stressed the importance of preserving the historical and legal status in Jerusalem. As the international community continued to put pressure on Israel to allow in aid to Gaza, U.S. President Joe Biden has reiterated that a two-state solution remains the only means of ensuring security in the long run for the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. He advocated a future reunification of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip under a revitalized Palestinian Authority. The U.S. reaffirmed stance came as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas urged the American president to intervene immediately to put a halt to the genocide carried out against the Palestinian people. President Abbas called on President Biden to put an end to the attacks by the Israeli occupying forces and to the Jewish settlers' terror against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in occupied Jerusalem that could lead to an imminent explosion. Meanwhile, the Arab Parliament condemned in its strongest words the Israeli strikes on two schools in Gaza that claim scores of lives as yet another war or another war crime that must be investigated and that required the accountability of those responsible for. It called on the international community, the UN Security Council, and human rights organizations to put a genuine pressure on the Israeli occupying authorities to put an end to the escalation on the war machinery in Gaza. In a similar move, the Gulf Cooperation Council strongly condemned the Israeli attacks on 2 schools in Gaza. Now, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced that Turkey would bring the massacre in Gaza before international justice with nearly 2,000 lawyers. The Turkish NTV television quoted President Erdogan as saying that the crimes taking place in Gaza must be investigated in order to punish those behind such crimes. Meanwhile, UNICEF has stressed the importance of immediately ending the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip that caused casualties and the destruction of the schools of Al Fakhura and Tel Al-Azhar or Zatar, Tel Zatar of UNRWA runs. Mariam Barshi has the details.
The UNICEF Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa, Adel Khader, has described as horrible and shocking the murder scenes. She stressed that children, schools and shelters are not military targets. In this context, the Executive Director at UNICEF, Catherine Russell, added that one more time horrible images of children and civilians killed in Gaza are seen while they sought refuge in a school which must always be protected. In a comment that she published on social media, Russell emphasized the necessity to end the killing, the destruction and the suffering immediately. About 200 Palestinians were killed and about 10 were injured by a strike of the Israeli occupying forces on the Al Fakhura school, one run by the UNRWA in the city of Gaza.
Protests and solidarity events have been held over the last 2 days in several European countries. These events are a continuation of an ongoing international action in support of the Palestinian people and in condemnation of the ongoing Israeli genocide campaign in the Gaza Strip. Multiple capitals and cities in Spain, Bulgaria, Sweden, Austria and Ireland witnessed demonstrations and solidarity events in support of Gaza, which is facing an Israeli onslaught. The events were organized and attended by various Palestinian, Arab and Muslim communities, political parties and civil society organizations advocating for Palestine. Participants called for an immediate ceasefire and the prosecution of Israeli war crimes. Waving Palestinian flags, they chanted slogans denouncing the genocide suffered by the Palestinian people. Demonstrators also expressed their condemnation of the Western countries that support the Israeli occupation in its brutal attacks against children, women and civilians in Gaza. They emphasized the need to respect human rights, adhere to international humanitarian law and put an end to the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people. These events underscore the global outcry against the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza after 44 days of brutal Israeli genocide. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Next is the event of the week.
The international event of the week.
The humanitarian situation continued to deteriorate in the Gaza Strip as fighting intensified on the 6th week of the Israeli army operations on the Palestinian enclave. According to Médecins Sans Frontières, thousands of people remain trapped in El-Shifa Hospital, one of Gaza's main hospitals, as fighting intensified in the nearby areas. It described the situation inside the hospital as critical, saying that at least 179 corpses, including babies who died on account of power shortages, were buried in a mass grave digged inside the hospital site. The World Health Organization (WHO) said that 36 health facilities, including 22 hospitals, have been damaged since the Israeli army launched its operations on Gaza. Asked if the concerns raised by the UN and by NGOs about the increasing number of casualties due to the lack of food, water and power that caused most of Gaza's hospitals to be out of action could force the Israeli government to reconsider its military action in Gaza, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had this to say.
That is certainly an option that the Israelis are faced with. But Benjamin Netanyahu has too much at stake to relent to this pressure. As he did in recent media gathering, he continues to justify these atrocities as necessary to protect Israel's national security. His challenge, however, is that this narrative is no longer accepted not just by the international community, but more so by the Israelis themselves and several Jewish communities in the world. In addition, the resilience of the Palestinian national resistance movement and international outrage have revived a long-forgotten debate in Israeli politics between those who seize the need to distinguish between those who question Zionism as a political ideology and who condemned some of its apartheid practices, and who argue for its separation from Judaism, and those, the other group, who sees no distinction and have since the United Nations General Assembly issued a resolution equating Zionism with racism, have been able to rally the Jewish community of all their dimensions against the United Nations General Assembly and of course the rest of the world and the Palestinians. As known, this resolution equating Zionism with racism was later withdrawn, and until this month, the Jewish communities more or less use Zionism and Judaism interchangeable, and they seem proud of being a part of those two. Even in Gaza, however, the massacres of women and children have caused the Israelis who are advocate for the separation to question their association, and this is causing friction among the Jewish community. Calls by Jewish demonstrators heard in demonstrations not in our name is Netanyahu's biggest fear. Netanyahu knows that his only way out of the criminal charges he's facing would be to remain in power, and thus he's taking all his time to stay where he is. As a result, silencing world opinions, driving the Palestinians to death by cutting all sources of life and inhuman bombardments become a personal matter for him. We can see easily in how Netanyahu conducts himself in conferences with the cabinet and the statement he makes to Israeli press. He's always keen on taking the credit and distancing himself the credit for successes, and distancing himself from the event when there is defeat. That is to protect himself from the future. So the bottom line is that the Palestinian resilience, the defeat, its ability to defeat Israel's expansionist project, and the impact that the images that we see from Gaza are all driving Netanyahu, or an indication that Netanyahu is defeated. However, the game changer, what will force Netanyahu to stop, is the internal threat, which is growing every day with the resistance of the Palestinian struggle and the world community.
Hundreds of thousands of people continue to flee southward, forced by the airstrikes carried out by the Israeli aircraft against the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Aid said the mass displacement continued in the Gaza Strip, estimated at over 423,000. The number of people displaced so far by the ongoing Israeli operations on Gaza. The Israeli bombardments still hamper the delivery of aid to the Palestinians who are lacking food, water, and medicine. Several countries are now considering using air and maritime options to provide aid to the population of Gaza. Asked if the Israeli occupying authorities would consent to extend the hours-long humanitarian pauses to allow in aid to Gaza, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
I think the simple answer is they could, but they wouldn't. This is due in part to the complicity of Western powers and failure to push Israel to do the right thing. recent Israeli position is that they would consent on a pause, but only to continue bombarding after, and to continue with their ethnic cleansing. This reality did not escape a member of the EU Parliament, or for that matter, the entire world. The EU Parliament, Holly Kearns, a social democrat from Ireland, indicated during an EU Parliament session 5 weeks ago into the carnage, noted that the EU has taken the same stand as Israel. Kearns rejected the EU position and called the EU leadership a coward, and their position is indefensible. The EU representative went even when she talked about the EU representative of foreign relations statement, she went further, asking the EU Parliament High Representative of Foreign Affairs, who called Israel for maximum restraint when a child in Gaza is killed every 10 minutes, and more than 40 journalists at the time were killed, asking him if that sounds legal, proportionate, and answering the question herself about how Europe lost its morality. This kind of position have found support in many parts of the world. And as an example, this week, Los Angeles Times became the first American newspaper to take a stand for the ceasefire. The editorial board wrote, quote, "It has become impossible to distinguish between Israel's decidedly non-surgical operation against Hamas militant in Gaza and the indiscriminate killing of Palestinian civilians. When so-called humanitarian pauses in the bombardment and ground operations are too brief to be realistically permit innocents to flee, or when there is no place for non-combatant to go that is not in line of fire, such pauses are so deficient as to be meaningless," end quote. From that perspective, the Israelis, and it is that same position that we see from many world opinion leaders and representatives and the streets in many parts of the world, it is in that context that Israel continues to violate international law, and the only thing that it could do right is by stopping the war, and that for now seems to be not their goal to do so.
This week, the Palestinian presidency spokesman, Nabil Abu Rodeina, reiterated that the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and had always been acknowledged as such by the resolutions endorsed so far by the UN as well as by the Arab, Muslim and non-aligned summits. He stressed that the PLO was the only national decision maker and rejected as unacceptable all attempts to cast doubt on its representation, as if it was more necessary than ever before for the Palestinian presidency to reiterate the PLO's representation of the Palestinians already acknowledged by the international community. Our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
In many ways, this was a response to the American position, which basically come to suggest that the Palestinian National Authority should take control of Gaza. As we know, Gaza has been under the rule of Hamas for many years. This American position, as we know, conflicts with the Israelis, who oppose the Palestinian National Authority, and in the recent position, perhaps the latest, they want a new Palestinian Authority. But both, it should be noted, agree, that is the Americans and the Israelis, that the Palestinians have no say in the matter. According to Mustafa al-Barghouthi of the Palestinian Initiative, this is unacceptable because neither Netanyahu nor Biden have a mandate by the Palestinians to determine their future by them. It is accepting what they need is to accept Palestinian right to exist free and under no occupation. Biden's further claim that the leadership that will rule Gaza must be accepted by Israel. This is simply saying that both Israel and the United States want a leadership that will serve their interests. So in that context, the PNE, the Palestinian National Authority leadership statement is to state the obvious, that the PLO is the only legitimate organization to lead Palestinians. As a Palestinian observer noted, it is the responsibility of the PLO to bring the entire Palestinian leadership at this time and to unite rank with no exception, and to tell the world, as they did by this statement, that they are the legitimate representative of Palestine and nobody should speak for them. The Palestinian, from that perspective, what the PLO statement, what the Palestinian National Authority is saying, that the Palestinians have the right to decide their future, and with no one no one should intervene in their decisions. And at the same time, they want to show and to make it clear that the Israelis and the Americans have, up to this point, have adopted a position of conquer and divide. The statement suggests that that is no longer the case, and the PLO is the only legitimate organization of the Palestinians is a clear indication of that.
In a statement issued this week on the occasion of the 35th anniversary of the Palestinian Declaration of Independence, President You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and now a reminder of our top stories. Algeria and the United Kingdom have reiterated their commitment to reach a lasting, fair and mutually acceptable solution based on the UN settlement providing for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. African trade unionists are at the 12th Congress of the Organization of African Trade Union Unity have expressed their solidarity with the Palestinian people being subjected to barbaric aggression by the Israeli army. And as the Israeli army continued to extend its operations in the Gaza Strip, the World Health Organization has declared Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital a death zone and says it considering evacuating the last patients. Thank you so much for joining us on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Smeni. You can join us tomorrow for same time, same frequencies. Goodbye for now.